Hey, so it's the Daily Dose. Today is Tuesday, and yesterday we talked about the power of a circle of community. So, as Paul is leaving Tyre there in Acts chapter 21, he makes a quick stop briefly, just for a day, and then he gets to Caesarea. Now, Caesarea is interesting. When he reached Caesarea, this is what it says in verses 8 and 9. Leaving the next day, we reached Caesarea, and we stayed at the house of Philip the evangelist, one of the seven. He had four daughters. He had four unmarried daughters who prophesied. Now, let me just pause there and point out a couple things. First of all, who is Philip? Well, we meet Philip early on in the book of Acts. I think it's Acts chapter 6. He's one of the deacons that helped serve those widows, those Grecian widows who were not receiving food like the Jewish widows. So he is one of the deacons. Then we get reacquainted with Philip, the evangelist, who actually takes the gospel and shares with the Ethiopian eunuch. You can read that in Acts chapter 8. Well, we learned something about Philip's family. He has four unmarried daughters who prophesied. Now, this is interesting to me because this tells me a couple things. It tells me, first of all, that even in the later chapters of the book of Acts, that the gifts of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit is still active, and he's using people just like you and me to share their gift with other people. And the Holy Spirit is not a respecter necessarily of a particular gender or a color or a socioeconomic class. He is for all people. In fact, this goes all the way back to a little Old Testament book called Joel. Joel says this, that he is going to pour out, God is going to pour out his Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. You know what this tells me? This tells me, friends, that you have a gift. You have a gift that God calls you to use to equip and to make his church, the family of believers, stronger and healthier to reach more people with the gospel. In fact, later on in 1 Peter 4, this is what Peter says to us. He says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So my encouragement to you is twofold. First of all, do you know your gift? Do you know how God has gifted you? Like, what are some of the gifts? Maybe you have the gift of serving, or the gift of teaching, or the gift of hospitality, or the gift of leadership, or the gift of prophesying. What are your gifts? Now, you might be saying, well, Adam, I'm not really sure. Well, if you don't know, you need to reach out to someone who you know who's a part of our community at Pathways. Maybe it's somebody in your circle. Remember, we talked about the power of community yesterday? That's one of the ways you have these kinds of conversations. So, like, what are your spiritual gifts and how do you use them and what does that look like to you? Or maybe you need to reach out to the church office. You need to email or call or talk to one of our staffers and say, I'm curious about my spiritual gifts. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about jumping in to serve. Sometimes I think we jump too fast. I think this is a time for us to grow in our awareness of how God has wired us and how he's deposited inside of us some spiritual gifts. And after we get an understanding of who we are, our identity, our wiring, it allows us to flow into ministry, not just at Pathways, but in all areas of our lives with our friends and our hobbies and our relationships and in our work and everything, because life can be a way of ministry, but that can only happen when we know, first of all, we're gifted by God, each one of you. Second of all, he's not a respecter of persons. All people are favored by him to be used of him as we grow in our relationship with him to see how he has put us together. The psalmist says that we were fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's you today. On this Tuesday morning, I want you to remember, you were wonderfully created by God himself with unique abilities and gifts and passions to serve him so that you can be a blessing to the people around you. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Dose.